For years now, Ukrainian nationalists have been working to purge Ukraine of all churches that are under the Moscow Patriarchate. And this drive, this militant pursuit to get rid of, or really to close, all churches in Ukraine that are under the Moscow Patriarchate was legitimized by Patriarch Bartholomew back in 2018 when he allowed for the establishment of a Kiev Patriarchate, utterly independent of the Moscow Patriarchate. So for a long time, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church was under the Moscow Patriarchate. There were Orthodox Ukrainian Orthodox churches, ultra-nationalist Ukrainian Orthodox churches that were really schismatic and that refused to be under the Moscow Patriarchate, and so thus they were considered schismatic. But because Bartholomew legitimized a Ukrainian Orthodox Church independent of the Moscow Patriarchate, those schismatic Ukrainian nationalist churches were legitimized, and now they are a part of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. Now, when Bartholomew said that the Ukrainians can have their own church and they don't have to be under Moscow, the Russian Orthodox Church was enraged by this, and the Egyptian Coptic Church said, "We recognize the independent Ukrainian Orthodox Church." Russia looked to the Egyptians and said, "We reject you." The Greek Orthodox Church said, "We recognize the independent Ukrainian Orthodox Church." The Russians looked at the Greeks and said, "We're done with you. We cut off our ties with you." And there was this big polarization that took place back in 2018 over this issue. And the reason why it is such a serious issue for the Russians is because by legitimizing these Ukrainian nationalist churches, you now legitimize a church that is fiercely anti-Russian, and that really legitimizes its whole existence by being contrary to Russia. Like, this is the whole reason why the Russians are against this, because the Russians don't want to accept a schismatic, ultra-nationalist Ukrainian church that reveres people like Stepan Bandera, who called for the mass murder of Russians, Poles, Jews, people who were considered enemies of Ukraine. And of course, this is connected to the most recent trending declaration, Slava Ukraina, which is really the Allahu Akbar of right now. Like when you had the Syrian civil war and the Syrian revolution, it was like people learned about Allahu Akbar pretty quickly, right? People learned about Allahu Akbar after 9/11, but a lot more people, I think, learned about it with Syria and ISIS. Well, now everyone has heard of Slava Ukraina, and maybe more and more people will learn about the second half of that declaration, Herodium Slava, glory to the heroes. So Slava Ukraina, glory to Ukraine, Herodium Slava, glory to the heroes. I guess the heroes are the martyrs who have died for an independent Ukraine. And then maybe people will learn about other sayings of Ukrainian nationalists that were actually very common in the 1940s in Poland when the Ukrainian nationalists were butchering the Poles, and that is, I think it's like, I forget how to say it in Ukrainian, but in English it translates to literally death to Poles. Anyway, so there was a report that came out recently. It was published by Pravoslavy, which is a big Russian Orthodox news publication. And it talks about how there have been churches in Ukraine, Russian Orthodox churches in Ukraine, that have been forcefully closed down due to pressure by Ukrainian far-right ultra-nationalists who want to purge Ukraine of all churches that are still under the Moscow Patriarchate. So this report says that in the city of Dolnya, Ivano-Frankivsk region, local activists have secured the closure of the temple of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church in honor of John the Baptist. The Dolnya City Council YouTube channel reports. Father Volodymyr, rector of the UOC, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church in the Valley, accepted the conditions of the activists who consider the confession an enemy and agreed to close the church on April 3rd after the service. So this church was under the Moscow Patriarchate, and the far-right nationalists said that this church is an enemy church. And so they pressured the church to close down, and the church agreed to close down on April 3rd, which was just a few days ago. In this temple, the clergy and believers of the UOC have been praying since 2009 after the acquisition of the building. So this is a statement from the nationalist activist. He says, on March 28th, a bill was submitted to the Verkhovna Rada to ban the Church of the Moscow Patriarchate. In this regard, we decided to stop their activities, said local activist Nikolai Vasilyev. The church must stop its activities in the territory of our community. By agreeing on April 3rd at 1400, the building where the services were held should be closed and sealed. Starting today, we will not let anyone in here. We are starting to be on duty around the clock so that nothing is brought into or taken out of the territory. If the agreement is fulfilled tomorrow, we will consider that we have done our job. So they are very proud of themselves for pressuring this church to close down. And the reason why they pressured this church to close down is because of racism and prejudice. They don't like Russians. That's what it comes down to. These people are of the spirit of Bandera. They are of the spirit of the UON, the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, which was founded by Stepan Bandera and other far-right nationalists like Bandera back in the first half of the 20th century. They hate Russians. That's the bottom line. And so they want to attack the churches. And there have been numerous stories of churches, Russian Orthodox churches in Ukraine, that have been attacked, windows broken, property destroyed. I spoke to a Russian journalist who was working in Donbass for about 8 years. So she was very informed and knowledgeable, and she had a lot of insight about what has been going on in that region. And she told me a story in which Ukrainian nationalists literally walked into a church and shot people. In addition, law enforcement officers with a local deputy searched the temple and vehicles. So literally shutting down a church, having officers go in and search the church and search the cars around the church. Like, it's unbelievable. Like, it's so crazy. People are talking about, Putin is a fascist, and someone actually told me this a few days ago. The only Nazis are the Russians. Hold on a second. There is legitimate criticism that one can have for Russia. One can have legitimate criticism for Russia's foreign policy. I don't have a problem with that. But let's not sit here and act like Ukraine isn't vacuous of any fascism. Let's not sit here and pretend that there is no Nazi problem in Ukraine, when the Ukrainian government literally wants to close down churches that are under the Moscow Patriarchate simply because they are under Russia. Shut down the churches. In addition, and this is not really a state issue, like this is an ecclesiastical issue, because these churches are under the Russian Orthodox Church in Moscow. At the same time, on April 4th, the mayor of the Ivano-Frankivsk on his YouTube channel announced the alleged transition to the schismatic OCU, Orthodox Church of Ukraine, of the Cathedral of the Nativity of Christ. But the Ivano-Frankivsk diocese denied this statement and noted that the community and clergy of the Cathedral of the Nativity of Christ did not transfer to the OCU, etc., and remain in the bosom of the canonical Ukrainian Orthodox Church. The press service of the diocese report, etc. So it goes on to talk about another church, another situation like this, and it says, armed radicals expelled the rector of the church in honor of the icon of the Mother of God in Kiev, after which the OCU announced the voluntary transition of the community of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church to the schismatics. People who introduced themselves as police and SBU officers conducted several searches in the temple, the church. They checked the altar, the living quarters, mobile phones, computers, and even the clothes and notebooks of the archpriest's children. The priest was interrogated, demanding to give the names and the etc. This is by the way, this article was originally written in Russian, so I'm reading a translation of it. It says here that the rector's family packed their things and began to leave the territory. And it says here, but the exit was blocked by radical submachine gunners who insulted and threatened the priest of the UOC. Only the prayers of the parishioners who demanded to release the priest influenced the armed radicals. All these threats were real. And this is a statement from the rector of this particular church. All these threats were real, not unfounded. Believers among the representatives of the defense forces who were there reported that only the family, mother and 2 children, became a guarantee that I, as a priest of the UOC, was released alive. By the grace of God, I managed to take out the, I don't know what that is, of the antimension of the temple and the liturgical utensils. Continues the rector of the temple, etc. So here we have churches being attacked, closed down, and this sort of thing has been going on for years in Ukraine. And all of this was legitimized when Patriarch Bartholomew, back in 2018, said that he recognized an independent Ukrainian Orthodox Church, not under the Moscow Patriarchate. And I believe that Bartholomew's decision was on account of pressure. It was due to pressure from the Turkish government. This is what I believe. And ultimately, this was due to pressure from NATO. Because NATO wants to use Ukrainian nationalism against Russia. And because the Orthodox Church, because religion is so influential, religion can be used as a tool for evil. And we know this just from reading the Bible. You can read this in the New Testament. Jesus was killed by the temple. And because religion is so powerful, it can be used for evil. So NATO, I believe, wants to use this religious polarization as a way to accelerate or to further accelerate nationalism in Ukraine against Russia. That is my assessment. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.